Hi, it's Dr. Brian McDonough, and welcome to the Dr. Brian McDonough Show. I have a very, very special guest, General Mark Hertling.
Well, it's great to be with you, Brian. I'm interested in what you would like to talk about today.
Yeah, I know that obviously we see you on television, obviously know of your career, and anyone who would just do a Google search can see all the things you've done. And we thank you for your tremendous service over the years. But you also work with hospitals and hospital organizations. And I know I do health reports, and this is a really tough time in medicine where many hospitals, hospital systems are really having a tough go. Tell me the advice you give to them, like to encourage physicians to keep fighting the fight to help hospitals withstand, the strain and provide the best care for patients.
Well, what I found in my relatively short time working in healthcare is there's an interesting dynamic between hospital administrators, nurses, and doctors. And in fact, there's a lot of research as to how sometimes the trust is not what it should be between those three entities. So one of the things I've been trying to do is bridge the gap with some of the leader development programs I've put together. I was initially asked to do that by the chief medical officer at a hospital that I worked for early on in retirement, starting in 2013. And I've since expanded that a little bit to other healthcare systems that have read my book and asked me to come out and do some things with them. But it really has to do with teamwork. And it's something that we do a lot in the military. We work on that from a leadership perspective. We understand the dynamics of teams. And I think, when you're in any kind of profession, whether it be the military or medicine or the legal profession or the ministry or whatever you happen to be in, the understanding of teams and how you work together and how you have to uplift your colleagues, even when sometimes you don't agree with them, is critically important in any kind of organization.
It's interesting you bring that up because I know in my own career, I have seen that evolution. The old theory was the doctor is the captain of the ship and everybody does what the doctor says. But, medicine, as you know, is extremely complex. And the more we can take advantage of others and their skills, I've seen it evolve to the point where we now have huddles where the pharmacist will be there, the nurses will be there, social service will be there, we'll be there. And it does work better as a team. And I think younger people who have entered the career are more accepting. But did you find in dealing with maybe people who knew it the old way, still have struggles with trying to take that team approach, and how do you get past that?
Yeah, when I first started diving into this, when asked by the chief medical officer to put something together, the initial request for me was to develop a leadership program for physicians, period. They wanted doctors to have a seat at the table. And in fact, the CEO wanted them to provide input from the voice that was closest to the patient. But what I found was that doctors weren't as accepting as that. And they said it was because administrators didn't take their advice. Well, the administrators were saying the same thing about doctors. So there was this tension between the two. And it has to do when you do the research. And this was actually the point of the doctoral dissertation I did in terms of looking at physician leadership and how it could be improved. The team approach of getting, in fact, the American Medical Association, I should point out, back in 2008, said that the best way to train any kind of subject in healthcare is through interprofessional means. And what they meant by that is don't separate the doctors from the administrators. Put them all in a group and help them learn together and to work through their differences and their challenges. And when that happens and you begin to build the trust like you would in any organization, it's amazing the kind of dynamics you see that will bring folks together and have them tackle some of the most difficult problems, when instead of just throwing stones at each other and saying, I have a better answer than you do and you should listen to me. So that's one of the things you have to overcome in healthcare. And I think that's one of the areas where we're being held back in many institutions, because doctors know the science of medicine. They don't know as much. This is a generalized comment. They don't know much about the execution of business. And they don't know, very few have been trained in the art of leadership. So both sides can learn a lot about that when you're talking a people business like we do in healthcare.
This is the Dr. Brian McDonough Show. I'm speaking with General Mark Hertling, and I want to shift gears a little bit. Technology obviously is playing a far greater role in healthcare. It's kind of put it on its ears, so to speak, but there's a lot of pluses we're beginning to see. How do you see the use of computer technology and resources to help serve those who maybe didn't get care in the past as easily, couldn't make it to the hospital, social determinants of health are working against them? How have you seen, I guess, in your experience, that being used effectively, and what would you recommend?
Well, a couple of things. First of all, it's interesting that telemedicine is I think now beginning to receive a big push, but this is something that's been around for a long time. Back when I was still in the Army, because my span of control was all the soldiers in Europe at 49 different countries. We had only a couple of hospitals and a couple of clinics. So we had to use telemedicine in terms of all sorts of things to make sure people got the right care. We're seeing more and more of that. There's more and more research about how effectively to use it. But I think one of the bigger things that I believe we will see radical changes is the use of artificial intelligence in all sorts of industries, but especially the potential for AI in healthcare. I'm not an expert on AI. I dabble a little bit in it, but I think when we're talking about the potential to gather a lot of information that will contribute to better patient care and get the latest kind of information, as long as you apply some good pragmatics and common sense to what you're getting from the artificial intelligence, it could be a very groundbreaking period in technology and the kinds of use that computers can give us.
It's interesting too that in recent years, well, the last 20 years, health information exchanges have been developed in different states. And I know in Pennsylvania, one of the things they're trying to do is increase research and how to use these tools. I'm sure you support that. Have you seen any interesting research thus far? Or do you know of any programs that are looking into that?
Well, in terms of clinical research, yes. And it's only because of my association with a lot of physicians who are doing just masterful work and have included me in some of the discussions. The first hospital I worked for for about 8 years that recruited me, and I came out of the military. And by the way, I should state that I don't have a medical background. It was kind of a unique request that this organization asked me to join them to run a couple of initiatives that they had been told it would be neat to hire a general because they have an understanding of scope and scale of large problems, and they could help solve them. But one of the things I saw, the hospital I worked for, which was Advent Health, had something called the Translational Research Institute. And they were taking things from the bedside within this relatively large hospital system, the largest faith-based in the country, and saying, what are the kind of challenges we're seeing? How do we put it into research immediately, solve it, use the Translational Institute to look at new ways to address it, and even create devices that would help physicians do things on the spot that they couldn't do before, devices and techniques. So that's the kind of research that I've been fascinated with, is just taking immediate problems and finding ways to solve them with teams, and then generate what we in the Army would call after-action reviews, so it can be passed to other institutions. And the medical community is blessed with a number of phenomenal professional journals in every single specialty across the board in physician leadership, Society of Hospital Medicine. There's so many great journals that are sharing this kind of information. And in the past, Brian, what you would have to do is wait for that journal to come out quarterly or monthly or whenever, or semi-annually. Well, now, because it's online, a continual search, and again, the use of AI can help you find solutions for problems immediately upon a research article being written, if we take advantage of that capability. It's
funny you mentioned that, Mark. In my own job, now I'm at the point, I think as you get older, you become more of a teacher, whatever. I was supervising residents, training them in the office setting. And part of what we do in teaching now is taking advantage of those tools. Like I go in, I sit down, they're going to come with all their questions. And in the old days, I just answer based on my experience. But now I have the Family Physician Journal open, Up to Date open, others, even AI, anything. And I can go in and say, all right, what does the USPSTF say about this? And it's at your fingertip. Or
Yes.
This rash, let's take a look at what it is on this website just to double check. And that is becoming a critical part of care using that technology. And that's why I was asking, I think as far as the research to more efficiently use the technology is better, because I think we're limited as physicians, just like you were mentioning from the business side and stuff. We're limited to what our searches are, not necessarily to what we could be getting. And that's the next phase as we go across. I did want to ask you a fun question. I know you do a lot of work with CNN and television appearances and things, and on very serious issues as well. How did you get into that? Like, what threw you in that direction? Did they just know your background, or how did it happen?
Yeah, interesting you should ask that question. I had my last tour in combat in Iraq, I had a CNN reporter who had been embedded with me for about 6 months. And we became relatively good friends. We shared a lot, very transparent. When you generate trust with someone, even if it's someone outside your profession and you tend to be not trustworthy of the media, he and I became very close, and we were very trusting and very candid with each other. After I retired, I got a call from him one day. It was soon after, within a month. And he said, hey, the organization really liked the way we executed our relationship. And I told them how great a guy you were. And they were wondering if you'd like to be a military analyst. And my initial response was, oh, hell no, I don't want to do that. I've had enough of you guys when we were together in Iraq. And he laughed and he says, well, if you ever change your mind, let me know. Well, a couple of things happened. I won't go into the long story, but I was persuaded by one of my previous bosses to take up the offer, because he said, sometimes the pundits and the analysts on TV don't really have the experience of the things they're talking about. And he says, you've been in combat, you've been a high-level general officer, you've seen the strategic view, and you could really inform the American public, 99% of whom have never served in uniform, about what we do and maybe dispel some of the myths. So starting in 2014, I started being an analyst for CNN. They put me under contract. And then it really, it was small things for the most part. It was just telling different stories about what was going on in the military if something would pop up. But then with the Russian invasion of Ukraine in 2022, because I had spent an awful lot of time in my last job as commander of forces in U.S. Army Europe, I spent a lot of time in Ukraine helping the Ukrainian army train prior to their invasions. I was able to really give some in-depth analysis of what was happening. I'd spent some time in Russia, and I talked to the CNN audience about how ill-prepared Russia was for the kinds of things they were attempting to do, and how I was one of the early guys that said, this is not going to turn out well for Russia, and Ukraine is going to survive. And sure enough, that was not really the accepted commentary in the early week of the war, but it soon became pretty evident that Ukraine was much better off than many people thought they were. So that happened, and then the recent war in Gaza occurred. I'd spent also a lot of time in Israel in my time in the military, and knew the details of some of the attacks and terrorist activity from my time in combat, and what was and was not happening versus what the common understanding of some of the conflicts were. So I was able to, I think, provide a pretty good overview of what was happening there. So for the most part, it's been a good relationship. And I think my primary objective of helping our citizens understand what the military does has been achieved for the most part.
One final question. I want to be very respectful of your time, Mark. You walked us down a path, and I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't say, where do you see this war in Ukraine ending up at this point? Obviously, you have in-depth knowledge and from your experience being there, and also as a general. What do you see happening? How do you see it hopefully being resolved?
Yeah, I actually think, in fact, I was just on a phone call with some folks in Europe about it, and I actually see the war being at an inflection point. And what I mean by that is Russia is hurt. They are hurt badly. Their military is in very bad shape. They've lost probably 60 to 70% of their forces. They've had a lot of casualties. Mr. Putin, because of sanctions and some cutting of economic relationships, both with the United States and Europe, his GDP is in very bad shape. His economy is in bad shape. So I really believe that there is a potential for Ukraine to regain a lot of their territory, either through a peace offering or just the fact that they continue to fight. But I would hate to see anything that would pull them away from a victory and allow Putin to continue to do the aggressive moves that he has been doing now for 3 years and beyond. I mean, he was doing some of these things beforehand in terms of interfering with nation sovereignties and the rights of countries to go their own way. So I can't say right now, Brian, to be honest with you, it's the first time I've felt a little bit lost. I don't know what's going to happen next in terms of our new government, as well as some of the other new governments within countries that are in the NATO alliance. So we'll see what happens. But I hope people are smart enough to realize that the world order is at stake, and we continue to support Ukraine in terms of their quest for sovereignty and freedom.
General Mark Hertling, thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule. Thanks for your service. And also, as a healthcare person, thanks for all you're doing now in your, I guess, second career or 10th career, whatever, but it's really helpful and we appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Thanks for having me. I hope this has been helpful.
Oh, it was great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.